Hi, and welcome to the 64th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the original inventor of TiddlyWiki, and I'm joined today by, from left to right on my screen, Branimir. Branimir, would you like to say hi and where you're from and something about your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Hi, my name is Branimir and I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria, using TiddlyWiki Classic from 3 years now and transferring to TiddlyWiki 5
Indeed,
as a
great.
user. Yeah.
Yeah, great to have you here, Branimir. Thank you for joining us. Mario, would you like to say hi and go through the same things?
Hi, my name is Mario Peach from Austria, near Salzburg. Contributed to TiddlyWiki Classic with themes and plugins and making the translation for TiddlyWiki 5 into German. And yeah, lately did some videos in German so that show the basic installation stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks for joining us, Mario. Nathan, would you like to say hi, where you're from, and something about your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Hi, I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States, and been working with and developing on TiddlyWiki 5 for about a year now. And yeah, helping
Brilliant.
my girlfriend learn and use it as well. So.
Indeed, we get two for the price of one with Nathan, two TiddlyWiki users in one person. Thanks for joining us, Nathan. And Ton, hiya, how are you? Would you like to say hello and where you're from and your involvement
Hi,
with TiddlyWiki?
I'm Don Gerner from the Netherlands, a long-time user of TiddlyWiki Classic, and now almost a year. No, it's more than a year now with TiddlyWiki 5, in order of some guides about customization of TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed. Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, all of you. Much appreciated. I'm getting a really weird video effect at my end. I don't know if YouTube's recording correctly. We'll kick off today with a few questions that are in the Q&A app that have actually all been posted by Branimir. Anybody else who's got questions, feel free to use the Q&A app to stack the questions up, and that obviously includes the two viewers I can see who are watching along as well. So let's kick off with the first question, which is, can we have a link or icon to open all found tiddlers? And Branimir, I'm imagining the particular context for this is after a search, being able to open all the matching tiddlers at once with a single click.
Yes, so with the natural search on the right and with the advanced search also.
Indeed. And so that is not currently possible, but it is a goal to do that. And in fact, in the latest pre-release in 5.13, there are some changes that, amongst other things, are going to permit, well, in fact, they do permit it now. Let me very quickly show you. And that means switching to screen share. So here's the latest build of 5.13, and it includes the new journal button. Branimir, talking about the new journal button doesn't directly answer your question, but I will get there in a couple of moments. So the new journal button is a feature we had in TiddlyWiki Classic. When you click it, it creates a tiddler with titled with today's date, into which you can write stuff. And part of the idea is that you might keep doing that through the day. If I hit new journal again on the same day, it actually reopens the same tiddler for editing, and so I can carry on. And then if I click the button tomorrow, I'll get a new tiddler. So I think for a lot of people, the value of journals is they're tiddlers that you create to capture something now without being slowed down by having to think of titles and tags. We've got some configuration for it in Control Panel. You can set the format of the title and the tags that are assigned to new journal tiddlers. So I was emphasizing that because that's a feature that's been asked for a long time. How we ended up going about it was by adding a completely new feature called action widgets. And action widgets are shown here in this example, where we've got a button widget that lacks the normal attributes that tell the button what to do. It's in fact just got content and these two invisible widgets. What happens with action widgets is when the action of the containing widget is triggered, in this case the button is clicked on, then it executes each of the action widgets in turn. And thus allows you to perform multiple actions in one go. At the moment, there are two action widgets implemented. There's navigate and send message. And if we look at send message first, this one allows us to send any message, which includes, crucially, the new Tiddler message. So that's how we implement the new journal button, is by specifying the remaining fields of the new Tiddler to include a title that's set to a macro that gives us today's date. So the other action was navigate. Now this one allows us to do the basic thing that's being requested, which is to be able to open two Tiddlers at once. So if we're currently looking at action navigate widget, if I close the other open Tiddler, so there's only one Tiddler open, it'll make it a little bit clearer. So there's our action navigate widget Tiddler. When I click this button, you can see it opens two Tiddlers, action widgets and button widget. So that's one part of the answer, Branimir, is that with action navigate we can open multiple Tiddlers at once. The issue, though, is that in a situation like with searching, how we define the we can't write. We need some kind of what's the word? We can't write out a separate action navigate widget for each of the matches. We need some way to either generate to use the list widget to generate a bunch of action navigate widgets, and so that's the next step, which is very much on my list. And then that will, as well as allowing us to open all search results, it'll allow us to do things like have an open all entry on the tag drop down as well. Yeah, so that's coming and we're halfway there. Branimir, did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. I will be anticipating it.
Yes, good. Well, thank you for bringing it to my attention again. It is definitely one of those things I don't want to forget. That's
nice.
Yeah, hopefully. Let's go back to the questions. And second one from Branimir is, how can I copy the contents of a Tiddler to the clipboard without going into edit mode? I think, as very clearly stated, what I think Branimir would like to be able to do is to copy the contents of a Tiddler to the clipboard with a single click, rather than, as at the moment, we'd have to go into edit mode, select all the text, which I'm doing, sorry, with Control A, and then copying it with Control C, and that's got all that material on the clipboard. Now, it turns out, and it's not at all obvious, but it turns out that copying to the clipboard isn't something that's in native HTML. So if we look at a Chrome feature like this, where there's a button to copy the hash of this commit to the clipboard, which is incredibly useful. I use that all the time, and bang, it's copied it to the clipboard. How that actually works is it uses a Flash movie, a small Flash movie, which has permission to copy to the clipboard, and normal web pages remain without that capability. According to this blog post, GitHub used this library, Zero Clipboard, to achieve it. So on
Jeremy,
the
screen sharing?
Oh! Well, that happens once a day, doesn't it? I mean, once a session. I'm sorry, I thought I was screen sharing. So where that started was I was just showing how, in this case, in the TiddlyWiki repo, github.com is littered with places where you get this icon to copy a piece of information to the clipboard, in this case the hash of the commit. And it turns out, and if I right click on this, you'll see that that requires Adobe Flash to do it. According to GitHub on this blog post, they're using this project Zero Clipboard. I should perhaps have gone to this address, which is their main site. So by incorporating Zero Clipboard, yes, we can do copying to the clipboard. It will need to be done as a plugin, and yes, I don't know. I mean, it's not something that is on my immediate list, but it's certainly something that would be good to see. The other wrinkle is that I am interested in supporting copy to the clipboard in Tiddly Desktop. In Tiddly Desktop, we obviously don't have the restrictions of a normal browser, and this is one of those restrictions that we'd dearly love to be able to get around. So not such a good answer, Branimir, because it's going to take somebody creating a widget, I would guess, in order to achieve this, and it's not, it's not an easy piece of JavaScript integration.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
But I mean, I guess it may be worth posting on the group. It may be one of those things that there's a lot of interest in. I'm not that interested in maths, but I did the maths plugin for TiddlyWiki 5 because there'd been sustained interest in maths from quite interesting quarters for quite a long time. So that can act as a motivation to get these things done. Branimir, thank you. Next question from Branimir is, can we improve on the table of contents functionality, standardizing the usage of fields with the prefix TOC-, such as TOC link, TOC hidden, etc.? And so if I understand you correctly, Branimir, this is about within the table of contents widget, it would be nice if we assigned classes to the various elements of the table of contents so that they could be styled more easily. Is that roughly what you're aiming for?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. People might come with suggestions about improving the table of contents with functionality or with design or whatever. And currently it's only using tags. And as you said last time, some people are complaining that tags are polluting their tiddlers. And actually here I forgot to add the TOC parent.
I see what you're getting at. Okay, so this is, I think we did discuss this briefly last week. This is, could we have an alternative TOC macro that instead of using tags to construct the table of contents?
Yeah, and not only to construct, but also if you use TOC hidden, then you can plan on some tiddler to be part of the table of contents, but not to be displayed until it's finished or whenever you decide. So you can use custom field starting with the prefix TOC and then putting hidden to yes. You can temporarily just hide it. And other ideas might show as well. And if we use fields rather than tags, then the table of contents functionality may expand indefinitely, actually.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, at the moment, I'm happy with the tag-based mechanism for TiddlyWiki.com. I mean, I appreciate it. It's not the right thing for every application, but it makes sense for TiddlyWiki.com because trying to explain that without going off on one, because the tags properly reflect the structure of the information that is being reflected, that is being published.
Yeah, you mean that they classify properly the hierarchy and the meaning of the connection between the tiddlers.
Whereas one could imagine tables of contents where those tags were entirely a sort of presentation scheme and didn't relate to the semantics of the data. So, so therefore, the answer to this is very clear: is that we need a new table of contents macro that's based on fields. By virtue of being based on fields, it can, I think, be a good deal more flexible than the existing tag one. And yes, that's something I would very much like to see and would be interested to have in the core. But it's probably best done by people who have those needs, if you see what I mean. I hope that with the table of contents examples that are in the core now, that's slightly lowered the bar to experimenting with this stuff. I mean, certainly somebody who's played with filters a little ought to be able to do the necessary adaptations to the existing table of contents macro.
So you mean this idea would be better implemented as a plugin?
Well, initially as a plug, well, it's a macro, so a macro is not it's not so necessary to make it be a plugin, but as a widget, say, which we would want to see as a plugin. But I think it's worth doing it first and then submitting it to the core. I mean, a flexible table of contents macro based on fields, I think, absolutely does belong in the core if it's not too too big, would be the only concern. But I think it's one of those things that we get right first, and we put it into the core once we're comfortable that it's right. And we've had situations with the table of contents macro as is, where I think it probably does have slightly the wrong behavior, but we're already in the situation where we can't change it because being out of beta. And so that makes me, when there's new stuff around, I'm in no hurry to bring it into the core, because if we bring it into the core, that freezes it. That makes it subject to the same backwards compatibility guarantee as the rest of the core. So I hope that makes sense. And as I said, I would encourage, I think it's a really fun area to experiment with, and I would encourage people to play around that and see if they can't get something up and running. Okay, and a new question from Andreas Hahn. Hi, Andreas. I guess maybe you're watching, hope so. Andreas does TiddlyWikiGuides.org. I think I'm right in getting that correct. And done a bunch of contributions that have been useful recently. So Andreas's question is there, or will there be in the future, documentation on how to more radically change the TiddlyWiki template and or integrate it into more complex ones? Example, some people would like a 3-column layout like in TWC. And so the question is about documentation, so I must answer it in that way, or first in that way. So no, I don't think there is a whole heap of official documentation on how to radically change the TiddlyWiki template beyond the templates that comprise the TiddlyWiki core that make a good example of how to get started. Ton, though, does have covers in his guides. I think, Ton, am I right in thinking that you cover bringing in a top bar and also a left-hand menu? So in at least some cases, it may be that Ton's guide, which is, Ton, what's your URL?
I'll put it in the chat window.
Brilliant. Okay. And I've just switched away from the Q&A app, which means, Andreas, that I've just lost your question. Ton has just posted Ton Herner at .tiddlyspot.com. Perhaps let me screen share so that people can see that. So here's Ton's site, tonjourner.tiddlyspot.com, and I think, yes, here we go. How to add a top menu toolbar, how to add a left menu and a top menu. But I think, Andreas, that may not be all that you mean, because those are fairly prescriptive instructions for those very specific tasks. The goal is to make one important improvement in this area, and I think I can illustrate what the problem is. Again, I must remember to screen share now. It's that with the current implementation, if you add the top bar, and I think this is an example of a wiki with a top bar, yeah. The problem is that the main Tiddler display area doesn't move to accommodate the top bar. That gets to be, or can get to be, a bit of a problem when you're scrolling, for instance. Yes, so here, as I scroll, now the top bar is actually overlaying the top of the Tiddler. It's not terribly clear with the nice clean colors that Ton's got, but you can see the shadow there showing that the Tiddler is up at the top of the screen. So the problem is that the bits of TiddlyWiki that do scrolling and positioning don't actually know about the presence of these sidebars, as we might, well, these are a top bar. So the goal is to handle that by adding a widget which is capable of doing the necessary calculations. So that will enable us to add a top menu, top bar, and for everything else to move out of the way. But we're not there yet, and it's particularly hard to do. I mean, there are CSS settings that would compensate for this problem by moving the Tiddler down, but it's very hard to do them as part of the top menu, because how far down you need to move would depend on how many top menus you have, for instance. So,
but you can do it in the settings I use. If you look at the right side,
yeah,
then the general settings,
yeah,
below the top sidebar and the top story river.
Yeah, and so if I change that, that will move things down. Yeah. So the new widgets I'm talking about would calculate those values automatically. That would be the attraction, and if the menu changes size, then this value would change to compensate. And then the issue I mean here is that if you set the top of the story river to 102 pixels within this guy, if there's another plugin that adds another top menu, then it's going to collide with this value for the top of the story river. So it's not a sociable setting that can be shared between multiple separate bits of configuration.
No, only within Mica 8.
Yeah, and it works. I mean, as ever, one of the things that works very well with TiddlyWiki is the way that we can innovate in specific circumstances, which covers, there's a sort of 80-20 rule here, where I think what Ton has done, my impression is that it covers 80% of people's needs for a top menu and a sidebar. And that as a group, we've been able to do that without having to make the core significantly more complex, to support the kind of flexibility that would be required to reach the other 20%, which has bought us time. And I guess what I'm mentioning really is a strategy for regaining that last 20% of functionality, the things that are a bit clumsy to do with the techniques that Ton is forced to adopt here. So I think that's all the questions that we have in the Q&A app. So if anybody else has any questions at the moment, this would be a great time to mention them. Otherwise, questions or comments. Otherwise, there's a couple of bits and pieces that I'd be interested in showing people.
Yeah, I have something in mind. Have you been thinking about a way to upgrade to new version several wikis at the same time? For example, now the upgrader accepts if you import just one wiki, but what if I have 15 or 20 or even more?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. What would a good solution to that look like?
Well, I would like to be able to just click the import and then be able to select several files, and they will be all imported but recognized as different wikis.
Mm-hmm.
Then they will be downloaded, I don't know, probably as a zip like Google does with the Drive, or separately, but I think it would be a zip.
Yeah. It will be, I think, quite hard to do it like that in the browser. Because at the moment, upgrade.html is itself a TiddlyWiki, and so what you do when you use it, when you drag your old TiddlyWiki into it, is that you're importing your old tiddlers into this new TiddlyWiki, which turns the new TiddlyWiki into your TiddlyWiki, and then you save it, and it's in the right place. But in other words, there can only be one such wiki in the browser at once, and I'm not sure that we could ever do it as a standalone application in the way that you're describing. I think it would need some kind of server side that was doing the upgrading.
I don't think that anyone would request to have it in the browser as you started. Probably, maybe if it's a functionality of Tiddly Desktop, because it's not a common task. But
okay.
Upgrade,
because I mean, of course, the other place that we can do that very easily is under Node.js, where one can easily construct a command that basically does the same thing that the upgrade mechanism does. At the moment, it would need some tweaks, but we could make it so that under Node.js it could apply the upgrade modifications that the upgrader module does at the moment. That's the things like checking plugin dates and so on, but actually at the moment they wouldn't happen under Node.js. So sorry, Branimir, it's a very clumsy answer. There's no way to bulk upgrade TiddlyWikis at the moment. There could be a way under Node.js very easily, but as it happens, it's not set up to work under Node.js. We absolutely could also do it within Tiddly Desktop too, and that's possibly the same thing by virtue of the fact that Tiddly Desktop can run Node.js. Yeah, and the bit I clumsily started with was that I don't think this can be a browser-based operation, which is fine that you were saying you didn't think it needed to be. Even though I think it's quite handy with the current arrangement of using the browser. The great thing about the present upgrade capability is that for people to upgrade their wikis whilst knowing that they're not being uploaded anywhere, all they need to do is to download that single upgrade.html file and open it locally, and then they, by turning the network adapter off and so on, they can be certain that their data isn't leaking out. And I really like that as a capability for people who aren't using Node.js, but it still gives them a powerful ability to verify for themselves the security implications of what they're doing, which I think is valuable. So, Branimir, sorry, you keep asking about future stuff, and it's not a great answer. But if you want,
it's just food for thought. It's not. I know it cannot be done now, but maybe in the future people will start growing with their number of wikis and.
Yes, I think it will definitely be a problem. For you yourself, do you ever use the Node.js configuration? Could you imagine using that to do bulk upgrading?
I could, but I don't have it. I haven't tried it with Node.js. I'm only using Tiddly Desktop mostly, and in the browser.
Yeah. No, well, and I really like that. I mean, I'm necessarily use TiddlyWiki in both places, but my goal is to, well, my attitude is to understand that for most people, the command line is a massive hurdle, and that therefore there will be, I think, forever a significant community of TiddlyWiki people or subset of TiddlyWiki people whose entire domain is the browser. And so for TiddlyWiki to serve them well, it needs to continue to try and do as much as it can in the browser that it also does in the server.
Yeah, you're probably right. I personally love the command line, and especially when I can use it, I write scripts for myself to automate tasks. And this using Node.js, as you say, might be the best solution for now.
I think it might be for you. I'd not put two and two together with what you were saying before about your day job, but no, if you're comfortable on the command line, then I think you'll find the Node.js configuration a breath of fresh air. It exposes its functionality as a series of commands that work on files, and so in a command line context, you can do an awful lot of very flexible stuff with the Node.js configuration. I'd be very interested to see how it triggers your imagination.
Yeah.
Cool. There's a question here from Yaka, which is also known as Armchair Designer. Could you provide a quick overview of the current relations, if any, between the TiddlyWiki project on your end or Una Mesa's and other like-minded OSS actors such as the Indie Web Network? Excellent question, Yaka. Excellent question. So there's the question is, what are our relations? And Yaka was asking either about me or about Una Mesa. Right now, Una Mesa isn't particularly active, and so I think it's fair to say any relations with TiddlyWiki would probably at the moment be through me and through other people in the community, such as, for instance, Nathan is very involved in TiddlyWiki, makes detailed contributions to the core of TiddlyWiki, and is also associated with other open source projects. So I mean that's the most common kind of relationship, I guess. There is one project that I do have a long-term relationship with, which is Zuko's least authority file system. So here we go. Yeah. So the Tahoe least authority file system is a way of storing files where the people running the infrastructure for storing the files have zero knowledge of the file contents, and it's a beautiful distributed system for exposing that kind of storage to web applications. It's been going for, I think, quite a long time, 5 years more, I'm guessing. And there's been a relationship with TiddlyWiki for a long time. Zuko, who's the leader of the least authority filing system project, has used TiddlyWiki for his blog for ages, and let's see if we can find a link to it. I'm so sorry. Well, Zuko, if you're watching, send me a link to your TiddlyWiki blog. I'll just try once more and see. No, I can't find it. But for Zuko, the interesting thing, well, I think the thing that makes TiddlyWiki interesting is that you can have some kind of security scheme that exposes the contents of a URI quite easily, and especially for a single item at once, because it means that you can handle the decryption of that item independently of any other items that it references. So I think for Zuko, the attraction is an entire website that only needs a single URL to be resolved in order to render it, and which is capable of syncing changes back to where it came from. And I think least authority file system is very much a like-minded project with me, at least, because it's well, it embodies many of the same principles as TiddlyWiki is about individual control, individual verifiability. You know, knowing that your stuff is secure, not because somebody tells you that it's secure, but because you can see for yourself, regardless of your level of technical insight, that the properties for it to be secure are in place. So that's one example. There's a bunch of, I made a list of projects that I think are like-minded in here. Let me, remember to screen share again. So this is the presentation I gave in, well, most recently at Google in September last month. And right at the end, there's a slide shouting out to allied projects. So IndieWeb, I think Andreas mentioned in the question. He did, yeah. So, and they've come up actually in Hangouts before. The IndieWeb guys, again, have a philosophy that's incredibly close to mine, and you know, therefore maybe to other people who are interested in TiddlyWiki. It's about personal control, but there's a emphasis on being able to, as I would think it, being able to participate in the blogosphere, and latterly in the siloed spheres of Twitter and Facebook and so on. So the ultimate IndieWeb, not ultimate, sorry, a sort of representative IndieWeb project is a thing called, I think, Known, which is a kind of personal publishing platform. You put all your stuff into it, and then it's syndicated out to other services. So, so if you're an IndieWeb-minded person, when you tweet, the tweet is stored in perpetuity on your own server with a URL that references your server, and then it's syndicated to Twitter to reach an audience and to allow people to read it. And I think that's a lovely model, and one that I would like to support with TiddlyWiki. You know, let people write stuff within TiddlyWiki, but publish it through the siloed big social network services, which is where the audience is. There is, as ever with people who share lots of beliefs in common, there are some differences, I think. There's a lot of the emphasis is on running a server. So somewhere in here, yes, there's I'm not sure if this is a place where they address it. Well, but they address the question of what if you don't have the technical skills or money to run your own server? What do you do then? And their answer, roughly, is that you become an apprentice to somebody else who is running a server, who gives you some space. And I must say, I do rather agree with that logic, that freedom on the web means being published through something that you control. If you can't control it yourself, then the best proxy is someone that you trust, and you know, so typically that someone that you trust is Facebook or Google or Twitter. But it's pretty awesome if that somebody you trust can be your brother-in-law or your son or something. The people involved in IndieWeb, a lot of them, I believe, should be careful about these kinds of assertions, but I know that a lot of them are people who previously and are still involved in microformats, and there's a whole cloud of allied interests, which is basically about being able to mark up pages in a machine-readable way. And again, that's something that I find very exciting and interesting. And I would like, I mean, TiddlyWiki can support microformats because you can generate HTML, but I think there's probably several places where it could do a better job of supporting existing microformats. So love those guys and see strong similarities. I don't think they see any similarities with TiddlyWiki. I haven't seen anybody from IndieWeb get excited about TiddlyWiki. I think because the IndieWeb people typically are people for whom the act of controlling and running a server is easy. And I've found in the past that to people who can control a server, who do have those capabilities, they often see TiddlyWiki as being a sort of unnecessarily clumsy way of avoiding something that they know how to do perfectly well, and so it tends to raise eyebrows. Why would you go to that much trouble to avoid running a server when it's so easy to run a server? So that's those guys. Smallest federated wiki. Some time ago now, I sat in on a hangout like this with the founder of Smallest Federated Wiki, who is, of course, Ward Cunningham, the original creator of the wiki. And I haven't been involved, really, but I track what they're doing very carefully. And my interests are to observe them, to see what they're where we're solving problems in similar ways. And they, for instance, the Smallest Federated Wiki has an idea a bit like a tiddler. This page is divided up into paragraphs, and those paragraphs, that the result is a lot like our story river of tiddlers. Anyway, Smallest Federated Wiki's thing is being able to federate content so that I can have my own wiki. I can link to pages in other people's wikis and thus link everybody's wikis together. And I can pull in pages from other people's wikis and modify them myself to create a modified version, and that joins the mesh of all available pages. And it has mechanisms for finding pages that are modified forks of another page. So in order to do that, Smallest Federated Wiki has established protocols for federation, which I'm extremely interested in and hope to support in TiddlyWiki 5. So my goal would be, well, there's two ends of it, that one can pull in Smallest Federated Wiki pages as tiddlers in TiddlyWiki. So you could start browsing at tiddlywiki.com and end up browsing your way through Ward's wiki.org site. And also vice versa, so that Smallest Federated Wiki users would be able to locate a TiddlyWiki tiddler and then seamlessly fork it in their own wiki. So, and the results of watching Smallest Federated Wiki, I'm delighted to have learned is that their scheme of federation allows completely static sites to federate. So in the same way that a static HTML file can publish an RSS feed by including a .rss file in the same folder, you can broadly include a something.json file in the same folder, which is what Smallest Federated Wiki looks for. So it's not something, lots of people have pointed out that the potential relationship between Smallest Federated Wiki and TiddlyWiki, there's not been any real demand for integration, and I don't know if there ever will be, to be honest. It seems to me that the Smallest Federated Wiki is much more oriented around people who are interested in experimenting with wikis and so on, where TiddlyWiki I think has a possibly bigger chunk of people who just want to use it and aren't are approaching it much like a piece of shrink-wrapped software. I'll cover these very quickly. Offline first and no back end, both kind of movements that articulate from different perspectives the advantages of not running with a server or being able to run without a server. So offline first makes this case, I think, what you can see from their introduction, that they're literally about being able to operate without a network connection. Whereas with the no back-end guys, you get much more of the same theme that we have with TiddlyWiki, the idea that by not requiring a server, you're able to run with any server. So the idea that, that you get to choose between lots of different storage media. So I quite like that, and they make a good job of articulating things. So say that very that run into TiddlyWiki. Fargo is Dave Weiner's project. So I talked to Dave Weiner on Twitter. It's an outliner that lets you store the outline in Dropbox. It's very similar to TiddlyWiki in that it's a client-side only application. It's not so similar to TiddlyWiki in that it makes API calls to do its stuff rather than folding itself up so that it can work without needing a server. Dave's doing lots of interesting developments at the moment. I'd say his target of empowering people to publish on the web, and I guess in terms of the outliner parts of things to provide a tool to help people think, is very closely allied to TiddlyWiki's. I raised these last two. They're probably slightly different sorts of things, but Substance Composer is a beautiful document writing application. So its goals are distinctly different than TiddlyWiki. It's about the production of narrative documents, and it has collaboration and other tools to improve that process. And this, maybe you can see from the screenshot, I think it's really beautifully done. It's also open source. They also have I believe it's a Node WebKit app, but somewhat like Tiddly Desktop as the means by which ordinary people run it. So I look at a fair number of projects like that, which sort of, don't necessarily have things like open source and JavaScript in common, but increasingly do so these days. And finally, Hoodie, you can see they cite offline first and no backend, is a way of doing offline first web applications, and I believe that Hoodie is it's a project. I don't think it's a company. I think they're just I think it's just a nicely expressed open source project, as far as I know. I don't think it's commercial in any way. So those are the ones that I've talked about before. There's some really obvious projects that I can't remember the terms of Andreas's original question. It's about relations with like-minded projects. I mean, Mozilla would be another obvious one, I think, that Mozilla have a very clearly articulated vision, and I think TiddlyWiki is a very strong answer to some of that in the area of individual empowerment and so on. Chrome is an open source project. We probably ought to have more of a relationship with that as well, and Node.js. But Yaka, that was a bit of a long answer. I'm not sure if that covered the sorts of things that you were asking about. But fire in another question for clarification. So I'm going to move to the... Oh, well, sorry, before I do, has anybody else got anything to say about any of that lot? fine. So next question from Yaka. Wouldn't the serverless qualities of TiddlyWiki make it a perfect candidate to fill this relative blind spot in the IndieWeb approach, especially if a compact turnkey HTTP server could optionally be attached? Yes, I think so. Yaka's saying, couldn't TiddlyWiki be an entry-level IndieWeb thing for people who can't set up servers, who aren't in a position to set up servers? And yeah, I totally think so. It's not a big focus for me at the moment, but it's something I've thought about quite a bit. And we touched on when we were talking about IndieWeb. There's many features that the IndieWeb guys have pioneered that I think are quite important and would be very useful in TiddlyWiki. But yeah, it needs somebody who can span both projects, I suspect. And Yaka posted a quick clarification saying, I'm thinking specifically about use cases such as temporary stroke guerrilla TiddlyWiki serving over mobile stroke ad hoc WANs. And yeah, so isn't this stuff interesting? I'm not sure the areas that Yaka is thinking about this, but the idea of me being able to power up my cell phone in a mode where it advertises itself as a hotspot. When people connect to that hotspot, they, in the browser, are then taken to my homepage, and they can't get out to the internet, but they can see content that I'm publishing and pull down enough from my server to be able to, same as Federated Wiki, to be able to duplicate it and change it. I really, really love that. For lots of sort of unrelated reasons at many different layers of my life, I think I don't really like centralized solutions. I slightly resent how centralized solutions to problems are often the most intellectually threadbare solutions, uncreative solutions, and yet really annoyingly, they often work much better than I would like to think. Now, of course, without getting too ideological about it, we live in a world that is more centralized than I think it has ever been before. And that's partly computers that have, and software and networks that have driven us in that direction. And I certainly think that, well, put it quite strongly, really, the only people who are going to be able to break that are technical people, is us. I mean, I don't just mean software developers, but a bit more of a continuum than that. Because laymen, these kinds of federated, well, anyway. So yes, Yaka, I'm very interested in those use cases, and I think TiddlyWiki is uniquely well placed to exploit some of those opportunities. The fact that you can do things like put an entire TiddlyWiki application in a bookmarklet staggers me in terms of what it means is that you've not just got a URL, a URI representing the location of an application that you can go and retrieve, but that you can actually pass the application itself around as payload. And yeah, I think that's profoundly exciting stuff. Any other comments, thoughts about any of that? Okay, there were a couple of things that we could maybe look at. One would be to, in time-honored fashion, to review some recent changes in 2.1.3, the main one of which, the new journal feature, we've already looked at, but there's a couple of other things.
Jeremy, I have a question. When do you plan to release it?
Oh, I planned to release it last Friday, I think it was, wasn't it? Well, good question. Those action widgets were the problem. I had been thinking about them for a while, and then there was a lot of correspondence at the beginning of last week, and then I think I did the first implementation on Wednesday of last week. And at that time, I was hoping to be able to do the TiddlyWiki release quite soon afterwards. But what I found over the following 3 days was that there was a lot of clearing up to do, as is often the case. You kind of do a bit of a sprint to get some new chunk of functionality in, and you manage to get it working, but then it can take a day or two to sort of mop up the implications of it and deal with the knock-on effects of other parts of the system.
And what I think was very interesting, so that there has been, let's say, a lot of new buttons very fast. So you had the new journal, then the new here, then new journal here, and this stuff. So I think it will be quite exciting also for the community. So these new buttons are really
yeah,
cool.
well, let's have a quick look at those then, because I do have some questions as to whether we've done the right thing. So the first new button we looked at briefly is the new journal button, so I'll turn that on. It's a bit silly, but the new journal button has the feature that it shows today's date. So if I find the underlying image, you can see there that it includes the date, and if we edit it, you can barely see, but that there's a SVG uses the T-span element for text, and as you can see, it gives the XY position of the text and whether it should be centered, and then the actual text is a TiddlyWiki macro invocation of a new macro called now, which returns the current date formatted through that format string, and DD gives us a 2-digit day of the month. So it's quite a fun technique, probably a bit wasted here, but I do find myself, I don't know, strangely drawn to it. It's quite odd. I was quite excited. I think I did it on the 8th of October, and when it trotted into double figures, I was quite excited to do a refresh and see how it would appear.
I first thought it is a radio because of the 8, so it looked like a radio to me.
Yes, well, that brings us to one of my questions, which is that the best icon we can come up with for new journal?
Oh, it's okay, I think so. I like it.
Well, it starts a non-obvious convention that will have a small plus sign in the minus of other things that you can add. I didn't do it this time, but what I plan to do is to add a plus button that looks like that with a drop down, where people will be able to register a number of templates for new tiddlers. So this is trying to do what TW5 Scholars does. So TW5 Scholars has this idea of a bunch of different types of tiddlers, and there's a create button for each of them. And in fact, there's all this stuff about them being created in the sidebar first. But I'd like to do that in an integrated way. So you hit the plus here, you get a drop down, like that drop down, and choose new journal or something else from it. But even when we have that, we'll still keep new journal as a top level button that people can use.
Mm.
What happens if you don't refresh overnight?
Then it would show yesterday's date until a refresh happens. If you just came in the following morning and did that, that causes a refresh, but the refresh didn't actually refresh that icon, and that's because we don't currently have refresh handling in macros. If you want to create something that refreshes, it needs to be a widget. So there is actually scope for an equivalent widget to the now macro that does dynamically update itself. And in fact, we need that in order that these pesky modified dates work. That a limitation at the moment that I really don't like is it says this tiddler was created 1 second ago, and even after I finish speaking, it still says 1 second ago, and now it's 10 seconds ago. So that's the situation with dynamically refreshed dates, that at the moment we don't have it. So those times will only get, if I reopen that new tiddler, you can see now that date has been updated, and it's a similar situation with this button.
But Jeremy, if you have this thing counting again, so I think it was counting already, then please somewhere include an option to switch it off.
Yeah, so I think the way to switch it off is probably to not make it count in seconds, but minutes for people who want it. But I think it's not just a gimmick. That the risk is that if you come back to something and see a misleading report, that can be confusing. And you might make a decision based on thinking that somebody or something had modified this thing more recently than it actually had.
If it's 1 minute, then it's okay. But the counting thing with the 1 second count, it is just disturbing. So if you read something and then it jumps every second.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we shouldn't go too deeply into it, but you remember the translatable strings that we use for these relative dates. I was thinking something like, if the seconds one was missing, i.e. overwritten by blanks, that then it wouldn't display the seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing we've got is new here, and new journal here. I'm going to switch them both on so that we can play with them. My first question is actually about the icons. So we'll look at new here first. It creates a new tiddler tagged with the title of the tiddler in which it was clicked. So there you go. And if I go to another tiddler and say new tiddler tagged with this one, then I'll get a second tiddler that's tagged getting started. So I've got the first one, hello there, and the second one. And so that mechanism is, I think, is a big part of a lot of people's workflow. I know Dave Gifford is very excited about it. Simon Baird's been busily building it into an update to Monkey Pirate TiddlyWiki. Simon Baird suggested going one step further, which is a new journal here button. So what this does is to create a new journal tiddler, still with using the date in the format that's configured in Control Panel, still tagged with journal, but also tagged with the tiddler from whence the click occurred. And this behaves slightly differently. If I now say new journal here on new tiddler 2, it adds that tag to the existing journal tiddler. So that's the same behavior that I showed you before with the new journal button, that if there already is a journal for today, then it is reused. There are, when you start to play with this, you will find some weirdnesses. If I do something like this, change that title to something else, and now try to do a new journal here, then it still reverts to that tiddler, even though arguably it's no longer a new journal because I've changed the title to be something else. But you can see the clue is that it's still recorded as a draft of the new tiddler.
Yeah, but if you save it, then it would create a new one. So
yeah, absolutely. So now if I save it now and then choose one of these, I haven't done it with community, then I now get a new journal tiddler. So certainly one of the ways that you can get confused is if you close draft tiddlers, which is fine. You can close them and you can find them again in here. But it means that it stops you being aware of whether a partially in progress tiddler has been is still in draft mode or not.
Yeah, I think if you want to have a new tiddler for every click, then probably you should add hour, minute, second, so you can click the new journal every second and you get the new tiddler. So.
Indeed, let's show that. So
just if you change the title, just add the second, and then you can click it quite fast.
I'm gonna change the title to something I think that Xavier suggested, which is includes the date and the seconds. I think there is a date format string for milliseconds actually, but anyway, that means that I get a precise timestamp each time I click the button, and so get a different tiddler.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there may be people who want to have weekly journals. You could vaguely imagine that as well. Where I think you'd have to use the format like that. You'd have to make the date be the week number. So questions about this new here and new journal here is, as I said, whether the icons are any good. So the rationale for the new here button is to echo the close others button. So close others, I see that as being like a target focusing on the tiddler that I'm clicking on. So I click on that and all the other tiddlers disappear. And I was quite happy with that. So it somehow seemed that that led to this icon, the idea that so new here targets the current tiddler but creates a new tiddler is, I guess, roughly what I'm hoping that icon communicates. And then for the new journal here, I've just reused the same icon that you get over here. So the problem there is that means we've got an icon, a toolbar button that does one thing in tiddlers and does something slightly different over here, because if I click it over here, it wouldn't be tagged with creating journal tiddlers.
Jeremy, first Nathan joined again, and probably you could add a little circle around the plus, so only one circle probably. Then you have a different icon.
Yes, I do wonder.
It's very small, so.
You mean you're talking about a circle on this one?
No. Yeah, no, but the new journal here.
Oh, I see. Yes. I figured that there didn't seem to be room for it, and so it's a bit frustrating because also I really hate iconography that requires me to parse the contents of an icon to understand what it is. So a principle I try and follow is for the outlines of icons to be as distinct as possible. And obviously there are some cases where they're not distinct, like the ones that the round ones that we've got. And in some cases there's a relationship there. So what you're expected to recognize the icons at a glance by their shape, not by sort of reading them as one might, I guess, a Chinese ideogram.
But I think that everything which is in the toolbar is always something like here. So if you close the X, then you close the existing tiddler. So if you hit the journal button on a tiddler, then you expect it to do something with this tiddler. In our case, it's tagging the new tiddler.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm telling myself at the moment, that it is the same function. The additional thing that happens within a tiddler is by virtue of being within a tiddler. And if you're not within a tiddler, if you're clicking it over here, it should be fairly obvious that it can no longer do the thing that it does when it's within a tiddler. Mm-hmm. But still, it's. I think we're also seeing here the beginning of the end of our ability to display all the toolbar buttons in one list. There used to be a hilarious screenshot of Microsoft Word with all the toolbars turned on, and I think one toolbar with a good million tools.
80% of the screen then.
Yes, exactly. And here, the particular problem here is that now on many screens one would need to scroll down to reach the lower buttons. So I'm aware that the more of these toolbar buttons we add, the more that's likely to become a problem.
Yeah, but you can still make them smaller. So if you add a little, if really someone wants to have a lot of buttons, they can add a little bit of CSS and make them smaller.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm
yeah.
not so worried about if they've got a lot of buttons here, a lot of buttons selected. That seems okay. But because they've chosen to have loads of things there, but having loads of things here isn't something they've chosen and isn't something they can change. Is the concern.
What about wrapping the icons on 2 rows or 3 rows?
Yes, I think that's what we're going to have to do, something like that. Maybe grouping them by category, maybe providing an incremental text search, and I don't know. But it strikes me that having seen how many plugins people use in, it's quite common to see many dozens of plugins in TiddlyWiki Classic, and I assume that reflects behavior and desires that we'll see in TiddlyWiki 5 too. And there's actually an awful lot of functionality that is best exposed as a page control button, because that's the way that we invoke global functionality that isn't specific to a specific tiddler. So almost any action that we introduce to start supporting in TiddlyWiki, it's going to be surfaced as a toolbar button. So other things that we've done has been in the background making more things be translatable. And in this particular case, thanks to Mario's reminder, is making sure that the date strings are translatable. So if I switch to German and then say new journal, okay, of course I get.
You have changed.
I changed it. I'll refresh and get rid of all the mess that I have caused. I will switch to German and do new journal. There you go, and I get a much more fun spelling of October than you do in English. We address something that's been has roused quite strong feelings, which is that now when you set a password, you have to type it twice. And this is to avoid a problem where if you mistype your password and say set password and then save and then close the browser window, you've made the TiddlyWiki unreadable. And so if I clear it, I also get a prompt now. So if I now reset it, and I'll set it to 2 different passwords, and I just get a prompt saying it doesn't match.
Jeremy, I also there was a discussion about the encryption, because I have the feeling that set password doesn't make it clear that it actually encrypts the TiddlyWiki. So in the German version, I said activate encryption and deactivate encryption. So there is no password, but there is a password in the dialog. But I thought it would be important to let users know that it's not only a password, but really the whole file is encrypted.
That's a really good point. I wonder whether encrypted and unencrypted would work as labels. But you're absolutely right. The password is incidental. The thing that's important is that the wiki will be encrypted.
Can you switch to the German version and set the password again? There is also a little bit more text. So if you change the language. So yeah, it said then it said verschlüsseln, but then in the dialog there is a little bit more text. So it says the TiddlyWiki content will be encrypted with the next save. So would it be possible to have the dialog a little bit bigger?
Yes, I think so.
And there it says encryption, also deactivate the encryption. So there is a short button, and then it gets the button gets much bigger. But I think it says a little bit more about what really happens.
Yes, so I think both those are great ideas. We should change the text of the toolbar button, and we should improve the text in the password dialog to make it clearer.
I also thought it would be good to add a link to encryption, and then if the user opens the encryption tool, it tells them that we really use a strong encryption mechanism, and if they forget their password, they forget their content.
Okay, so do you think that I was thinking that would be a link to a Tiddler on TiddlyWiki.com, yeah?
Yes, yeah, I think it's just yeah.
No, I agree. That's slightly harder than the other two things because at the moment there's no way to put a link into the password dialog, but there could be, and that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Do you want to either ticket or pull request those?
Okay, yeah, okay.
That's much appreciated. Something I'm really delighted about is managed to get the KTeX plugin working under Node.js. So that means that we can now, on the server, generate, let me try and find the right place, but it means on the server we can generate static HTML renderings of maths that don't need any special plugins in the browser. So index.html and static.html. Index.html is the standard KTeX demo. So that's a working TiddlyWiki. This is a static rendering of the same thing. It doesn't have the banner it should actually have, but that means that functionality does not work. But you can see here that the formulae are still rendered correctly. So for things like being able to publish ebooks that include, created in TiddlyWiki that includes maths notation, that's really important. And it's also the reason why I'm not such a fan of MathJax is that MathJax makes it very hard to do that server-side rendering piece. It, in fact, would require us to ship MathJax as part of this static file so that it can do its layout.
Jeremy, there have been some requests that, let's say, what is it? Syntax is missing in KTeX. Do you know? Are they responding to the feature requests?
Yes, they seem to be. They seem to be highly responsive. So I think that their users are actually the same as our users. You know, they're mathematicians preparing content for the Khan Academy and others who are used to these features. So when you look at their or the last time I looked at their issue list, it seems to me as if most of these, so that one, are actually about shortcoming symbol aliases. Limsip should. So yes, and I think also the version of the plugin is now 29 days old, been 41 commits. So I'm at the moment waiting until they make another release before I put it in. But it may be that although they're developing very actively, that they're not doing that they're doing releases at more irregular intervals, and it may be worth us moving to tracking head or tracking master, sorry. On this plugin.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know if they are active, because at the very beginning, as I watched the first issue list, there hasn't been a lot of discussion, but now I saw that there is a lot of bubbles. So yeah.
Yeah, I think they've we started to use them here. This is commits we're looking at here. But you can see they've had a huge spike in well, not popularity, a huge spike in activity that I think has been triggered by that by all that attention.
Okay.
I got some feedback that the X for that closed box is too small. I think there's quite a few things like that. Was also a question about whether these X's are too small as well, but that wasn't raised at the same time. There's the action widget stuff that we looked at, the add prefix and add suffix, which are kind of match some existing filters that there was already remove prefix and add prefix kind of rounds out that set. We've fixed some bugs, and one of them, I think we discussed it last week, was the Mario's favorite, the jumping toolbar icons, which I believe is now fixed for good, as they say.
Hopefully, yeah.
Until we accidentally reintroduce it. And as I said in the ticket, it taught me that I don't like floats, that they have peculiar, unpredictable behavior.
There's a lot of discussion about floats in the web, so they are a little bit strange,
Yeah. One bug fix that is worth drawing attention to actually is, gosh, it's funny trying to use German. If I go into zoom in,
Sprache. It's the one with the flag.
Yeah, it's funny. They have some are uppercase and some are lowercase.
Yeah, this is really a problem. But because if you, for example, in the Tiller title, if you just have the titles without the icons, I want to have them all lowercase, and verschlüsseln is one of them. And yeah, it's a little bit, it's a little bit ugly, I know, but I don't know how to fix it at the moment.
Well, I guess whatever's clearest for people who are used to reading German.
Yeah, so some have to be uppercase and normal cases. So at the very beginning, I did everything lowercase, but then it looks strange.
Yes, I can imagine.
It feels wrong. Yeah. So I'm not sure yet. So I'm waiting for the feedback.
Cool. Well, it may be that we need to use small caps or something.
Yeah.
I was just going to very quickly draw attention to another bug fix that's been requested for a long time, is a fix to the width of tiddlers in zoom in view. So now when you hide the sidebar, you get the correct width for the tiddler, whereas on TiddlyWiki.com at the moment, if I go to zoom in view and then hide the sidebar, you get this maddening thing where there's a little bit of horizontal scrolling. So that was yet another of those sorts of CSS nightmares, really, trying to find the right place to fix it that didn't have knock-on effects on anything else. Anyway, so there's still just talking very briefly about changes for 5.13. I've now moved on to another area, which is described in this ticket. So the big problem that I've had for a while is that the TiddlyWiki release process is only set up to publish new content when we publish a new version of TiddlyWiki. So there's no process in place to make it easy for me to rebuild TiddlyWiki.com. So like right now, for me to rebuild TiddlyWiki.com, I need to build it with TiddlyWiki 5.12. And of course, my working repo is at 5.13 pre-release. So to accomplish this, I have brought in something that Mario we discussed many times before, I think, a new repo called build.germaline.github.io. And so this is where we put all of the batch files and so on that are concerned with building TiddlyWiki.com. And so those are all the ones that have the peculiarities of that we've discussed before, that because they are designed for ease of execution by me, they're not always doing the things that are useful for other people.
Tell me, did you remove the build, for example, build sh from TiddlyWiki repository?
Not yet, but that's my plan. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, it's worth having a quick look at that actually. That the there's a number of there's a lot of different types of cleaning up that are needed here. So things like serve.sh we will keep, because obviously the new definition of this bin folder is going to be batch files that are useful for end users using TiddlyWiki, and serve.sh succeeds for that. But we'll lose lots of things like this, verbump, upload, tiddly space, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think will make things a lot more comprehensible here.
Mm-hmm. And I think it will also, if we have less build sh and also CMD, it may be easier that we can integrate it with npm, for example. So probably that we have only one build script that works for every operating system. So
yes,
in the future maybe.
The way to do that will still be to migrate these scripts to Node.js, and I guess in order for that to be practical, what we need to do is to radically reduce the number of these scripts.
Yes, yeah. That would be good. Mm-hmm.
And then, so in the build folder, there are instructions that they're actually in the dev TiddlyWiki, so they're in here. But they get copied automatically to GitHub. Here we go. And some documentation. I've had introduced some new environment variables. We've now got this master build.sh that builds everything, but you can choose which version of TiddlyWiki it builds it with. The purpose of that is to be able to have a pre-release folder. So I'm sorry, this isn't turning out to be a desperately clear way of showing this. At the same time as making this change, I'm going to move over from publishing via germaline.github.com to publishing via the new recommended name, which is germaline.github.io. So that's a change that GitHub made to URLs. I never bothered to change my side of it because you don't need to, but I think making this change, it makes sense, because then when other people are looking at the project and trying to figure out what they've done, they won't see, the slightly surprising thing of this old school URL. So that germaline.github.com, that's the current build on tiddlywiki.com. This is the new build that I'm preparing. So in here, the index.html is 5.12, but it's got the very latest content, and there's a pre-release folder which contains another index.html that contains the 5.13 pre-release with the latest copy of the content. So what's going on here is that therefore soon we will have at TiddlyWiki/pre-release a complete copy of tiddlywiki.com, but with the latest pre-release version of TiddlyWiki. So my thinking on this is not to call them betas. It may be that we will do betas in the future, where we've got a big change that we want to publicize to end users before it comes out. This is more for more easily being able to publish the sort of nightly builds. So it was partly prompted by once I'd done this stuff, the new journal stuff, there was an immediate inquiry from Dave Gifford, can I play with this? And of course, I think it's important that we make it easy for Dave to play with it then and there, because that's the best time for feedback on features like this, where there's very visible to end users. So that's all a bit of a bore, all this reorganization. It's been quite a lot of hairy commits and more writing of batch files than I really like, and yeah, lots to go wrong actually. But it will put us in a much better position. It means that when somebody posts an interesting link to the groups, I will try to very quickly do an update of the TiddlyWiki.com content that has that new link in it, or when there's documentation errors, they'll get fixed more quickly. And obviously necessary that, as we've talked about before, the gap between releases is liable to get smaller. Bigger. We're liable to have bigger gaps between releases. And so it becomes even more important that we can regularly update the content in the meantime, in between releases. Wow, there's a whole load of new questions appeared. But any comments on any of that stuff I was waffling on about? Cool.
Jeremy, one fast question. How often do you want to update this pre-release document edition?
Don't know. I mean, there are certain times when it's definitely obviously useful to do so and to tell people about it. But it's one of the, at the moment, that pre-release has everything in it, so it takes a bit of time to run that script, a couple of minutes. So I certainly wouldn't be pushing at every change, but I could reduce the pre-release folder to just an index.html, and then I could make it that literally every time I do a build, it gets pushed up to GitHub, and I'm not sure.
Jeremy, can you go to the control panel?
Yeah, but I'll screen share first this time.
Yes, please.
And I'll do a refresh to get rid of my previous nonsense. Go for it.
And the tools.
Oh, yes.
So I wanted to remind you about this message.
Yes, thank you. Yes. And of course, I've prioritized other stuff before doing this, so I really ought to change the message. But the plan is to have some export button here. The ideal is an export button that gives you a drop down of the particular export formats that have been registered, and you'd be able to configure your own, and that there would be a similar export button on individual tiddlers. Oh, sorry, post, so that you can export a single tiddler. So yes, something. It's one of those quite annoying things that it's just a bit more UI boilerplate to do it. It's not particularly demanding, but hasn't been done yet. Oh, I thought I'd stopped screen sharing. Oh, I have. So a couple more questions from Yaka, and Venice has said, annoyingly, I must go early, so probably after these questions we should draw things to a close. Yaka's question is, would it be possible to add a mention of edition compatibility, i.e. Node.js versus standalone at least, in release notes? Either a filter or a table recapping which change applies to what edition could avoid some confusion. That's interesting. So is it what the question here is, some of the changes that we make only affect people on Node.js, and some of them might only affect people who are using the standalone edition, and can that be flagged? I don't know the best approach to that. I mean, because there's a bigger problem, which is that many of the people who use the standalone edition probably have no interest in any of the Node.js stuff. So something I certainly think about quite often is whether TiddlyWiki.com is currently compartmentalized correctly. So TiddlyWiki.com itself addresses people who are using the standalone edition or the Node.js edition, and the documentation for both are in the same place. And then we define TiddlyWiki.com/dev as being for developers, i.e. Notably JavaScript programmers. So there's a clear line there, but I really wonder whether I've got that in the right place. And it may well be that TiddlyWiki.com itself should restrict itself to addressing users of the standalone edition, and that we should have a new documentation site, or maybe reuse the dev site for people for giving Node.js information. Having said all of that, in the vast majority of cases, most features are relevant to both configurations, and I'm not sure that I could make a very long list of features that are specific to one or the other. I mean, the ones that are it's the ones that are specific to Node.js, because anything that happens with the standalone edition broadly also happens when you're running in the client-server configuration. But interesting, I guess. It also makes me think of another concern, which is the recent. We do very long release notes for releases of TiddlyWiki, but now when you look back at the beta ones, there's a lot of detail there. And probably the only bit that's of interest to people now is what were the incompatible changes in each release, which is a question that keeps coming up to my surprise. We've had a few people on the group asking about uploading from 5.06 and 5.07. And at the moment, you have to plumb through all of the release notes to pick out the changes that need to be paid attention to when you're upgrading from a particular beta edition. So, Jaakko, it's not a great answer to your question. I guess, would it be possible to add a mention of edition compatibility in release notes? So I think maybe an actionable version of this question actually would be that the splits I use in the release notes at the moment, the release note is structured as usability improvements, hackability improvements, and bug fixes. It's possible that we should make Node.js into one of those headings. So if we had a section called Node.js improvements, we would put just the issues and features that are restricted to Node.js. And maybe, I think that would probably be an answer to your question. So let me open the release note, and I'll just make that as a very quick change. And then I'll come back and phrase that more sensibly. So thank you, Jaakko. Next question. A plus icon with a drop-down menu offering all types would limit toolbar creep while being consistent between sidebar and tiddler toolbar. Yeah. I think so. Jaakko is talking about the the suggestion that we briefly discussed, having a button like this that drops down to a list of the different types of new tiddler, and Jaakko's listing them there. And yes, I agree. I think it's a good way to tackle it. So
this will be a new button. So
it would be a new button, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it would, in its drop down, it would automatically show the buttons that were capable of creating new tiddlers, and those buttons would themselves be available to be individually added to the main toolbar as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Jaakko is saying reserve 1 to 3 button slots left of the info button to auto-populate with recently used, most used. And oh, sorry, I pressed that a bit too early. And yes, I have some sympathy with that. This is the idea that we should show 5 or 6 buttons by default, and that the remainder could be the most recently used. So if I do that and then do perma-view, that might then cause perma-view to automatically come up here. Or it could be most recently used, most useful in the sense of, well, I suppose that's what we do at the moment, actually, a pre-configured list of useful things.
Yeah, but the automatic thing needs to be enabled and disabled, because what's really annoying is if programs try to think for the user.
I would have to agree. I think that's the thing that sounds like a plugin to me.
Yeah.
I think there's some virtue in being, in being stupid and predictable for software.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. So Yaka, thank you for those. I'm afraid to say that as I said, I'm going to have to buzz off a little bit earlier than usual. So before I do, is there any comments or questions from anybody before we close? Okay, so it is for me to. Oh well, actually, one thing I will just throw in is Nathan. I'm very sorry we didn't get to discuss your recent tickets. On the other hand, I think we've come to the conclusion that Hangouts aren't the best place to discuss tickets because there's a bunch of people for whom that discussion would be gobbledygook. But thank you for those pull requests, and I'll look forward to talking on GitHub later. And to all of you, thank you very much indeed for making time today. Much appreciate your contributions as usual. And great to see so many people here. And I will look forward to seeing you next week. I think we're going to, yes, as normal, have one on October the 21st. So as usual, we'll wave goodbye to everybody and I'll press the stop broadcast button. So cheers, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.